So we have been deep diving on every team's offseason so far, going through the NL East, the AL East, the NL Central, and now today we're doing the AL Central. And this finally happens when we got a trade involving two teams that I hadn't literally just talked about. So we'll get into it today. This is Smarter Baseball, where we deep dive into everything going on throughout Major League Baseball. If you enjoy the content, show your support by liking the video, subscribing to the page, turning on notifications. Go ahead and go follow on social media. The links are down in the description. Let's get into it. We're breaking down every AL Central team's offseason, taking a look at the guys that were leaving these teams, the guys coming into these teams, basically deciding whether did they get better, did they get worse, just on the guys that are leaving and coming in. Re-signing guys progressing or regressing, coming back from injuries, leaving that out for the sake of these videos. Just looking at the guys that they brought in and the guys that ended up leaving. Free agency, trade, roster signings, whatever, all of that. Only really looking at the significant moves though. By that, if they played relatively on the team that they're leaving, 30, 40 games, you could say they had at least somewhat of a role. We'll go ahead and talk about it, possibly cover it. Guys that are coming into these teams, anybody that's projected by Fangraphs to be on the 26-man roster, you can go check out the roster resource page on Fangraphs. That's an awesome place to go get a whole lot of information. So let's go ahead and get into these. We're going to start first with the Chicago White Sox. So first, their main big loss here, you got first baseman Jose Abreu. 157 games last season, 824 OPS, 138 WRC plus. So even though the power was down a little bit there, still really good offensive numbers. 3.9 FWAR has him closing in on the 5 needed for what WAR deems all-star level. So still a very solid player despite getting up there in age a little bit. You got Engel, Harrison, Andrus all coming off of bench spot start kind of roles there. Andrus really in the 43 games that he was with Chicago, 773 OPS, 119 WRC plus, 2 FWAR just in that time. So already gave you starter level value in that shortstop position, filling in for Tim Anderson. Couple guys here really though that, I mean, you're not losing too significant like of a role here with any of these three. Mendick also coming off the bench. Now you've got Johnny Cueto coming out of the rotation. 25 games this last year, 158 and a thirds innings, 3.35 ERA, 3.79 FIP. We already kind of talked about him when we covered the Marlins. Cueto's a very solid middle of the rotation kind of a guy. Plugs into like that third spot in a rotation. Gonna keep you well within ball games, but not quite at this point really going out and winning a ton of games for you. He's not gonna be winning a bunch of these like 1-0 ball games over the course of a season. So very solid numbers, not anything blowing you out of the water. Vince Velasquez, who also kind of bounced back and forth between the rotation and bullpen. Kyle Crick, both on their way out. Decent numbers for them. Again, not anything too crazy. So what do the White Sox do to address these? They go out, sign Andrew Benintendi. 126 games last year, 772 OPS, 122 WRC plus, 2.8 FWAR. His season cut short a little bit by injuries there, but still put up pretty good offensive numbers, leaning more towards on-base percentage than slugging, but fills a role for sure. Everyday kind of a guy out there in left field. You've also got Reyes coming in, who filled a bench role last year, but Mike Clevenger comes in to replace Cueto in the rotation. Struggled a little bit last year from the heights that we've seen him be at. 23 games, 114 and a thirds innings, 4.33 ERA, 4.98 FIP. Hopefully he bounces back a little bit, gets closer to the player that he was. But if anything, he's probably slotting in at least towards the back end of this rotation, and is a guy that is going to give you a good amount of innings. You've also got Avila here, Rule 5, and I realize I haven't explained a Rule 5 pick in any of these videos yet so far, so basically real quick, the beginning of each offseason, MLB teams have to decide who they're going to put on their 40-man roster. This protects players from the Rule 5 draft. They don't have to be on the major league roster, but the 40-man secondary roster. Once a player's put on there, they're protected from the Rule 5, and then when the Rule 5 draft happens in usually about January, mid-January, teams can go through and pick guys from other organizations that are not protected by the 40-man roster. And usually, depending on how old a player is when they're drafted, whether they sign internationally, come out of high school, come out of college, they usually get about 4 or 5 years where they could be in the minors, don't have to worry about the Rule 5. Once that eligibility's up, then they're eligible for the Rule 5. So when this draft happens, every team goes through, they can pick guys that are now Rule 5 eligible, so they've been in the minors for a little bit. If the major league team decides not to protect them, other teams can pick them. They're now on that new team's active 26-man roster. They have to stay on the 26-man roster for the entire season, or the team that they were on originally can take them back. So White Sox go ahead and nab Avila in the Rule 5 here. He'll got a shot to hop into the bullpen. Overall now for the White Sox, you look at Benintendi and Abreu, both pretty solid players. You can kind of make the argument Benintendi is a little worse offensively, but plays a more important defensive position. Not that he's necessarily like the best fielder out there, but you get more value out of his defense in the outfield than you do with Abreu's at first. So over a full season, maybe relatively evens out there. Clevenger, who struggled last year, isn't quite what Cueto was, so you might be downgrading there just a little bit. And then you're just losing a ton more from, some potential pitching here, the bullpen, and then guys that filled more of these kind of not quite everyday roles that all in all, I think talent-wise, this team ends up getting just a little bit worse. But when you factor in Tony La Russa's not here, this team's winning the World Series. Congratulations, White Sox fans. 2023 World Series champions without La Russa now. Let's go to Cleveland. We've got leaving the Guardians. Getting that name right has been such a mind meld for me after growing up with them as the team that used to be in Cleveland, but besides the point. Cleveland has Austin Hedges, their main catcher last year, heading out 105 games. Come on, man. 489 OPS, 42 WRC plus, negative 0.6 FWAR. It's kind of hard to be that bad, so hopefully something comes in. Something is better than that. Anything can be better than that, hopefully. Got a couple or one other catcher here leaving, more of a backup role. Miller off the bench as well, or I don't know, off the bench. 130 games, definitely gave you more bench value though. 652 OPS, 85 WRC plus. Nolan Jones, a handful of games. And then Kirk McCarty, starter, reliever, 13 games, but numbers were not great. Again, negative FWAR here. So really not a lot leaving Cleveland here. Who do they bring in? Really, these only two guys. Josh Bell, 156 games, 784 OPS, 123 WRC plus. A bit of a down year, but kind of looking at his numbers, he kind of does this where he fluctuates down to about this, and then the next year he'll be up in the 800s for OPS. So maybe he just kind of fluctuates year to year, and next year he's even better than this for you guys, Cleveland. Mike Zunino also comes in, only 31 games last year, 499 OPS, 43 WRC plus. Zunino pretty solid defensively. I got to watch him quite a bit when he was younger, more coming up with Seattle. Offensively, though, really, this is a guy that, like, if he doesn't hit the ball, which he does very, very often, you're not going to get a whole lot out of him. I mean, that's great insight, dude. If a guy swings and misses, you're not going to get anything offensively. Attaboy. Zunino is a very swing and miss guy, but when he does get a hold of the ball, it can go quite a long ways. But that's really about all he's bringing offensively. So you gotta kind of hope that he fills more in as maybe that catcher against left-handed pitching, gives you good defense, hits a couple home runs for you here and there, and they come at the right time. So overall for Cleveland here, I think I gotta say they end up getting a little bit better with these two guys, just because the guys that were leaving, I mean, it's almost better that they're leaving, so that almost kind of helps as well. Hedges and McCarty combining for almost 1.5 negative WAR. That leaving is already just going to be a big benefit, let alone I do think Bell can be a solid everyday player, maybe even bounces a little bit back more towards like the higher end of what we've seen from him. And this is definitely very small sample size for Zunino. Offensive numbers should be better than this. All right, next we'll head out to Detroit. Guys leaving the Tigers, you've got Heimer Candelario, Harold and Willie Castro, Reyes, who we mentioned earlier, Barnhart, Clemens. A lot of these position players that if they did end up playing quite a few games, I mean, Candelario, Castro, that's easy to remember. All over 100 games last year, but none of them got higher than 0.7 F WAR. And I mean, WAR's not the end all be all, but you can go ahead, take a look at these OPSs, WRC pluses. They really weren't giving the Tigers a whole hell of a lot this last year. So really a lot of guys that are probably going to end up filling more bench roles on other teams leaving here. And as far as then your pitchers leaving, Hutchinson, who bounced back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen, 105 1/3 innings, but 4.53 ERA, 4.93 FIP. Again, really not a whole lot there. The big loss here really is you've got a good amount of pretty solid relievers who are on their way out, but for a team like the Tigers, with where they're at in this rebuild that is going not very great, to put it politely, you're not really worried about relievers leaving. So Chafin and his 2.83 ERA, 3.06 FIP, Soto 3.28 ERA, 3.59 FIP, Jimenez 3.49 ERA, 2.00 FIP. At least the couple of those guys, I know Soto and Jimenez going out in trades. Hopefully you get the prospects back that they can contribute somewhat in this rebuild, and you're not super worried about these guys ending up leaving because you've got bigger problems to worry about than your bullpen right now. Who do they bring in? Matten, Sands, Nevin, all again really just kind of bench type players. I mean, none of them really played all of that much. Matten 35 games, Sands only played 3 last year, Nevin 58. Matt Vierling is one that comes over in the trade, 117 games, 648 OPS, 81 WRC plus. He'll probably get a decent shot to play. I can talk now. He's gonna get a shot. Already covered him in a potential breakout players video. If you want more on him, go check that out. But I mean, none of these offensive guys really anything that you're blown away by. Pitchers, you've got Matthew Boyd, Michael Lorenzen both coming in who could possibly be kind of solid additions to this rotation. Again, not anybody too crazy. Boyd only played 10 games last year after coming back from injury, 13 1/3 innings, 1.35 ERA, 3.19 FIP, so very solid in the time that he was back. Lorenzen, 97 2/3 innings, 4.24 ERA, 4.31 FIP. If anything, kind of gives you that like fourth guy in the rotation where you're not having to rely too much on these young pitchers that you have and, really chuck them into the fire. Hopefully they can kind of get their feet wet a little bit more. Also have a Rule 5 pick coming in to try to get a spot in this bullpen. But overall, again, for the Tigers here, really not anything too crazy that's leaving and not really anything too crazy that's coming back in. So, you've got Boyd and Lorenzen will be, again, decent maybe in the rotation. You're losing a lot of bullpen, but that's like the last concern for the Tigers right now. And as far as any of the position players, Willie of the two Castros was the only guy that had positive WAR last season. So there's a whole lot of turnover, and that might honestly be a good thing for the Tigers this year. Kansas City Royals now. We've got headed out. He started his career there. Possibly could be the end there. Zach Greinke, 26 games started, 137 innings, 3.68 ERA, 4.03 FIP. Really at this point, just about kind of on his last legs, but still put up pretty solid numbers this last year. Michael A. Taylor now is the guy, mentioned it earlier, just gets traded today. We'll talk about where he goes in a second. 124 games, 670 OPS, 90 WRC plus, 1.5 F4, because not a whole lot offensively for him, but Gold Glove defense out in center field. So definitely losing that in the middle of your outfield there. Ryan O'Hearn gets sent out, bench guy there. And then really, again, just a handful of relievers here. Spear, I'm positive I'm getting that wrong. You guys come here for the stats. You stay here to watch me fuck up names. Let's be real. Spear, 17 games, 19 and a thirds, 2.33 ERA, 3.78 FIP. Pretty solid numbers there for a reliever. But again, kind of with where Kansas City's at, and that being a little bit smaller sample size, 19, 20 innings isn't a whole lot. You're not super worried about a reliever leaving like this. Kansas City then goes and they bring in Jordan Lyles, 32 starts, 179 innings, 4.42 ERA, 4.40 FIP, 1.4 FWAR. Also Ryan Yarbrough, 20 games, 80 innings. His number's a little bit higher, but we've seen where he can kind of be with this in previous years. Hopefully he kind of bounces back to that and we get more of this like mid to upper threes ERA and FIP for him, getting more of a healthy full season, kind of bouncing back. And then an interesting one here, Aroldis Chapman comes into this bullpen, and after kind of getting chased out of New York in the Yankees last year, let's see what he's got here. 36 and a thirds innings, 4.46 ERA, 4.57 FIP. It could be interesting to watch, or it could go very, very horribly. I don't think there's going to be an in-between. For the Royals here, Lyles and Yarbrough are decent additions to the rotation. Maybe not quite what Greinke was last year. Maybe they're about the same or, a little bit better. But if anything, having the two of them again, like we kind of said with the Tigers, now you don't have to rely as much on these young pitchers. These guys, if anything, will give you decent amount of or a lot of decent innings here. Probably 200, 250 plus. That's innings that you don't have to chuck some of these young guys out to just figure it out, kid. Let's go. Also losing Taylor out there. Pretty solid defense, but again, you can not super easily, but it's a little bit easier to find really, really good defenders than it is really, really good hitters. So while this is a loss, not a terrible one. And then again, you're not super worried about the bullpen here. So overall, I think I'd have to say the Royals end up staying relatively about the same again. All right, and this brings us to our last team, the Minnesota Twins. Main big loss here we've got to cover in the trade that just covered on the channel. If you want, go ahead, check that out for more in-depth. But Luis Arraez, 144 games last year, 795 OPS, 131 WRC+, 3.2 FWAR. Pretty good offensive player here. Very solid player overall. Well, I'll get a little bit more in depth with him when we cover the Twins as a whole here. Catcher Gary Sanchez also leaving, Gio Urshela. Both these guys fill in pretty everyday kind of roles. Sanchez 128 games, 659 OPS, 89 WRC+. Urshela 144 games, 767 OPS, 119 WRC+, had 2.4 FWAR. And then you've got Cave off the bench as well, kind of backup outfielder. Now out of the rotation, Chris Archer, Dylan Bundy, both 25 plus starts, over 100 innings, but both of them ERAs, FIPS, mid to high fours. So definitely more at the back end of that rotation. You've also got Stashek, 16.1 innings pitched, 3.86 ERA, 2.07 FIP. Pretty solid out of the bullpen there. Fulmer, not quite the same numbers, but 24 1/3 innings, 3.7 ERA, 4.14 FIP. Now, I don't like looking at FWAR or WAR in general too much with relievers, just because how little they end up pitching all that. It can kind of show some weird things. So despite him having negative FWAR, then I don't see Fulmer as like a detriment to a team being in a bullpen there with those kind of numbers. They're decent. They're not terrible, but they're not great. Now, for who they bring in then, outfielder Joey Gallo comes over, 126 games, 637 OPS, 85 WRC+. Definitely struggling in New York there at the beginning of the year. That brings his numbers down. See if he can bounce back. You've got catcher Christian Vasquez, 119 games, 714 OPS, 99 WRC+, helping the Houston Astros win a World Series this year, 1.6 FWAR. Very, very solid catcher there for you. Good everyday kind of a guy. Again, not anything that's going to cost you, but not really anything that's like going to win you ball games, I would say. Twins are the receiving end of the Michael A. Taylor trade, who we just covered. Again, not a lot of offense, but very, very good defense out there in center field. Kyle Farmer also comes over. Very kind of similar vein. I wouldn't put him defensively in the same like area, realm, whatever as Taylor, but definitely more of a defensive guy here. 145 games, 701 OPS, 92 WRC+, still getting that 1.4 FWAR, so just a little bit below starter level. The big addition though in the Arraez trade, Pablo Lopez comes over, 32 starts, 180 innings, 3.75 ERA, 3.71 FIP, 2.4 FWAR. Again, right now, based on those numbers, kind of that like third guy in a rotation, just solidifies the middle of it. Still fairly young though, still has years of team control. Maybe this next year again, we see him continue to take step forward. These numbers can go down a little bit more, even more towards like that 3.5 or low threes, bringing him more towards like a solid 2 in a rotation. That could be a very, very good add here. Overall for the Twins then though, this is where I'll really get into this trade. So Arraez offensively is a very, very good, he was the batting champ this last year. Very good contact, gets on base a decent amount. Offensively, very solid player. Does not have a whole lot of power though. And then when you take that into consideration with the fact when he's played at second base, defensive numbers are not favorable to him. When he plays at first base though, the defensive numbers are fairly solid, but first base, you're not worried about defense quite as much, and then now you have a first baseman that doesn't have a whole lot of power, despite how much, contact on base he is giving you there. So he's kind of this like almost an NBA, stretch four kind of. He's like a tweener. He doesn't really, prototypically fit either of these positions. You send him out and get Lopez in, who we talked about. I think floor is like third in the rotation. Ceiling could be second. I mean, possibly into the one, but I think at least into that like very solid 2 kind of a guy in the rotation, which is definitely an upgrade over Archer and Bundy. So despite losing what you do with Arise and then getting this with Lopez, I think there's at least an argument there that this is a very even trade. When you take into account then Vasquez can basically slide in to replace Gary Sanchez. Farmer is a bit of a downgrade from Urshela, not giving you quite the offense there. You do get Taylor, again, very, very good defense, but you already have Byron Buxton in center, who is very good defensively himself. So where is Taylor going to play consistently then? You're either then putting him at left or right, where you're not going to get quite as much out of the defense that he brings for you, or you're bringing him in to almost bank on the fact that Buxton is going to get hurt again, which then you lose Buxton's value and replace it with Taylor. So it's kind of this he's a great safety blanket to have, but I don't quite see where he really adds on to this team all that much. So all of that being said, also losing a couple of relievers, I think given Arias for Lopez there's at least an argument there, so you can say it's relatively even. Given these other kind of couple losses and stuff, I'd say Twins probably are just a little bit worse because of this. But now go ahead, especially if you're a fan of these teams, comment down below. Let me know, what do you think about all of these teams' off seasons? Do you think they got better? Do you think they got worse? Again, just going off of the players that these teams bring in and who they lose, not looking at re-signings, players progressing, coming back from injuries, any of that kind of stuff, just based on these off-season moves. Would you say these teams got better, worse? Anything else that you can think of with this? Go ahead, comment it down below. Also, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Show your support for the content by liking the video, subscribing to the page, turning on notifications. You can go follow on social media by following the links in the description. Any way that you want to show your support for the channel. I want to see, let's set a goal. Can we get to 1,000 subscribers by the time spring training starts? That would be awesome. I appreciate any of the support you guys have given so far. You've been awesome. Thank you so much. Let's see. We're going through every division. We've hit, like we said, the NL East, AL East, now both the NL and AL Central. So we've got the NL West next, and then we'll finish up with the AL West. Make sure you stay tuned. Don't miss out on those. Have an awesome day. I'll see you in the next one. Later.